Thank you, Abe, for inviting me to share my memories as well. I met Bryan when we were young 20 somethings who were both enthusiastically pursuing our careers as journalists, rising through the ranks. We shared a passion for people and storytelling and journalism with a capital J. And I really loved being around Bryan. He just oozed confidence. And you might have noticed a little bit, he had a little swagger. Bryan was my wingman for so many events, big and small, the White House Correspondents' Dinners, the before parties, the after parties, the in-between parties, and of course, NABJ. And despite my public persona, I was always a bit shy about meeting new people. Bryan would just take my hand, he'd walk me straight up to anybody and introduce me. George Clooney, Queen Latifah, just anybody. He wasn't shy or timid. You could make a new connection, a new friend. That was really his superpower. He was amazing at connecting people as he's connected all of us today. Several years ago, he connected me to an amazing group, the International Women's Media Foundation. He was a leader on the board. He wanted me to join him. We were very excited about the new ideas that we wanted to implement throughout the year, the newly selected co-chairs of the board. Bryan was the only Black man on the board. He was very comfortable in his role as an advocate for female journalists. And I always just loved our Amtrak rides together, to the board meetings, to New York. It just gave us uninterrupted time to talk. And he would always bump me up to first class. We'd sit together. He had a gazillion points. And he was always generous with what he had as well as his time. And I think many of you know he was very much into upgrading his friends. And for me, that meant high tech. He spent many hours in my house trying to make everything smarter. Me, my TV, my Wi-Fi, my heater. We used to joke that every time he came to our house, he'd leave with one thing fixed and then another thing was broken because we didn't know how to use it. He was the only person in the house who had set it up and understood the tech behind it. There was a time I had to call Bryan to change the temperature in my living room because he was the one who set it up on his cell phone. I'm sure, Abe, you can relate. Ironically, there are still some things that are broken in my house that I am not ready to fix because that belonged to Bryan. As close friends, we shared Thanksgivings and birthday parties, our mom's burials, countless brunches, big events, small, quiet disappointments. When he came to CNN, our offices were right next door to each other. And when that gig ended, he showed by example how to pivot gracefully to turn disappointment into opportunity when he embraced teaching. Bryan was a giver, not a taker. When my parents were sick, Bryan was there for all of the family gatherings, maybe to pick up the ice or throw the chicken on the grill, make a batch of his famous margaritas, or lead us down the Soul Train line or jump into the wobble. When I became a new mom, my whole household fell in love with Bryan. Everyone wanted to snuggle with him. Our big golden retriever occupied the left side of Bryan's lap, and our infant daughter, Soleil, would sleep on his right side. And Bryan stayed at our house for hours on end, perhaps because he was trapped on the couch. I don't know, taken hostage by our growing family. Bryan didn't give much oxygen to grudges or negativity or self-pity. We confided in each other over the years about our personal struggles. He was always straightforward, strong, and yet soft-spoken. He wept openly when he called to tell me his mom had passed away. He laughed heartily when we danced in the audience on the set of The View. And over the past several years, I marveled at how incredibly happy Bryan had become meeting Abe, blending their two families together under one roof, 4 kids, 2 humongous dogs, and lots of love. Bryan was my confidant and accountability partner. So we were always checking in with each other. He called me on Monday after he'd gotten back in town from his special 2-week vacation with Abe in Florida. And then he called me again on Tuesday. Tuesday night, we talked about how excited we were to get started as the IWMAF's board new co-chairs. And we talked about our families and our goals for the year after we would emerge from this quarantine, this COVID quarantine. And I ended the conversation thanking Bryan for being such a good friend. It was a very ordinary conversation. I was always thanking Bryan for being such a good friend. Bryan died the next morning, some 12 hours later. And it took me weeks before I was able to tell my 6-year-old daughter, Soleil, about his passing, because they too were very close. And when I did tell her, she saw how sad I was. I asked her if she understood. And she said, yes, Bryan was like a dad to me and like a brother to you. And I said, that's right. You got it. He will always be with me.